Joining us now from Wyoming, Republican Senator John Barrasso, member of the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Great to be with you, Shannon. Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with Secretary Yellen's visit to China. She says there are still significant disagreements between the two countries, but also adds this.
President Biden and I do not see the relationship between the U.S. and China through the frame of great power conflict. We believe that the world is big enough for both of our countries to thrive.
So given that the U.S. and China see the world very differently, they have different ambitions, they have competing interests, do you agree it's possible for both countries to thrive, as she said?
Joe Biden is playing right into the hands of communist China. Never again can we allow ourselves as a nation to be dependent upon them for anything. And to see Secretary Yellen there bowing down repeatedly in China, it's embarrassing and it's emblematic of this administration. You know, just a couple of days before she got there, they choked off a supply of key minerals that we need for semiconductors, for solar panels. These are the people that are stealing our trade secrets. They're buying up our farmland. They're killing our citizens with fentanyl. This foreign policy, it's a national security disaster. You know, we ought to be less dependent. We need to be diversifying our supply chain. Instead, the president is making it worse. He's shutting off mining for critical minerals in the United States while forcing people to buy expensive electric cars. He's making us poorer. He's making China richer. And it's going to get worse next week when he sends John Kerry to China to continue this surrender.
But the fact is, I mean, our economies are interwoven. American businesses have enormous interest there in China. So how do we coexist? You know, we see these Biden administration officials saying they're trying to reopen communication, that it's important for things like avoiding a military misstep. But American interests are very much tied up in China's as well on many fronts.
Well, they most certainly are. China is watching very closely what we do on all fronts, but specifically in Ukraine, because as we know, China and Putin have said that there are no limits to their friendship, and they both view the president as weak and indecisive. China, as you talked about militarily, they are gearing up significantly. They're looking at Taiwan. I think Taiwan needs the weapons and the technology to be able to porcupine themselves. This is a time for the United States to be showing strength, not this slow surrender that I see from this administration.
So let's talk about Ukraine. This week, the president is headed to NATO. They're going to talk about inclusion of Sweden, potentially joining that alliance. But also there are conversations about NATO welcoming Ukraine at some point. A couple of foreign policy analysts writing over in Foreign Affairs under this headline, "Don't let Ukraine join NATO," said this: if Ukraine were in NATO, the U.S. would be pushed to come to Ukraine's defense by deploying troops and even threatening to use nuclear weapons on Ukraine's behalf. American policymakers may hope to deter future Russian aggression against Ukraine by creating a path for Kyiv into NATO, but doing so creates a real possibility of drawing the United States into what Biden has called a World War III scenario. So how does the U.S., how does NATO balance those very real concerns?
Well, first and foremost, this is what the president needs to do in NATO. He needs to hold their feet to the fire. 500 days into the war, of all the money that's been contributed, the United States has doubled what all other NATO countries have done combined. Of the 30 NATO nations, only 7 of them are actually meeting their commitment to a 2% of the gross national product, and that number has dropped since Joe Biden has come to office. I think it's very important for the president to point out all of those countries are a lot closer geographically to Putin, therefore much more vulnerable to him. Putin is not going to stop until he is stopped. And the president needs to say that loud and clear at NATO this week.
So President Biden has said that Putin's calculation was that when this attack on Ukraine happened, it could potentially splinter different allies and NATO, but that NATO is stronger and more unified than it has been in a very long time. Do you give President Biden any credit for keeping that coalition together, for being the leadership voice?
No, I think it's important that NATO stay together and that we act in unity, and I think NATO has to be held accountable and do more. We cannot shoulder this burden alone, nor should we. There's lots of support in Congress for Ukraine, and it's for technology, it's for weapons, it's for information. It's not for troops. The best thing we can do now is to step up, and I see the president doing that now with the cluster bombs. I support those. This should have happened long ago. Russia's been using those for a long time. It just does seem to me, Shannon, that there's so much delay in the activity of this administration in ultimately getting to Ukraine what they need, but it's taking too long. You know, the president has this misguided fear that any time we send anything to them, it's going to just add to escalation in ways that Putin will then attack more. The Economist magazine this week reported that in the last year, the Russians, Putin, have fired 10 million. I mean, there's an astonishing number of shells into Ukraine. And by so many of these delays that we've had in this administration, I think it's just prolonged the war and added to increased death.
Do you think Ukraine should be invited to join NATO at some point?
You know, every time I visit with President Zelensky, he brings up this issue. I think he may want to come out and should come out of this meeting seeing a pathway to joining NATO, what steps they need to take only after this conflict with Russia is over.
I want to ask you quickly about the cluster munitions. Very controversial. A number of our allies have come out and said that they ban these weapons. They don't think that we need to be supplying them, the U.S. to Ukraine. Congress has had language in the defense appropriations saying that we can't send out these cluster munitions that have a dud rate higher than 1%, meaning some of these bomblets, some of the ordnance does not explode, but it's out there and somebody could happen upon it later and it could be tragic. It could be deadly for years to come. The White House says that they're going to go around essentially using the Foreign Assistance Act. It's going to go beyond what Congress has said is that 1% limit. Is it usurping your power as the lawmaker and the standard you've set for these weapons?
Well, you know, I voted against that bill back, I think it was in 2009. I support the use of these weapons. Russia's been using them all along. I think this fills a gap that the folks need in Ukraine in their battle. I wish they would have had them sooner. But, you know, right now, Shannon, the Congress, the House and the Senate are debating the National Defense Authorization Act, and that discussion will probably be part of those debates as we come to votes in Congress again.
All right, Senator Barrasso, always good to see you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.